Hey, Detoxers. Welcome to another episode of the Disinfo Detox. Today, I am joined by Professor of Ethnic Studies at California State University, East Bay, and the author of the People's Detective series. Please welcome Nicholas Baham III to the Disinfo Detox.
Hey, Nolan, thank you for having me.
Heck yeah, this is like old home week, man. We did
Yeah.
this week in, week out on along the line, so it's good to chat with you. And there's so much going on in the world. But I really find the work you're doing with the People's Detective to be critically important. It simultaneously feels like I'm getting away from all the crazy noise of politics in the world, but at the same time, I'm getting a deeper understanding of the world. So let's start there. Tell folks what the People's Detective is and why you started writing this.
Okay, so the People's Detective for me is part of a departure that I am now making. I wouldn't call it a departure. I would say maybe let's call it an evolution or an extension of what I do in academic writing and teaching and being in the community. And I am writing genre fiction. But my genre fiction is, it deals ultimately with issues that come up in the classroom for me. So this began actually when I was podcasting with you with Along the Line. That was one of my initial forays into reaching a more popular audience around things that we talk about all the time in academia. And if you remember, we decided that we were going to do, we were really going to dig down deep on stories that had not been covered and that the media was just ignoring, which was consistent with what Project Censored, generally speaking, is doing and what they publish at least once every year in one grand collected volume. So I began looking at, first thing I began looking at was slavery. Okay, so it was, I mean, it's sort of consistent with what I do in Black Studies.
Well, it's sort of a bad time to do that because this administration
Right,
is burying slavery, but it did exist. So thanks for reminding us of that, Nick. But go ahead.
right, right. Now that it's being erased, so, um, yeah, and I was interested in the degree to which slavery is a thing that continues to exist. So modern slavery, where does it exist? What does it look like? So we got into uh, children working, in mines, essentially producing digging up the minerals that go into our laptops that are central to our technology. We dealt with sexual slavery. I think we talked even about organ harvesting at
Mhm.
some point. So the first book in this mystery series, which is set in Oakland, by the way, deals with things that came out of that research, and specifically, it deals with sex trafficking. So Oakland is a hub of sex trafficking in Northern California. Some of that has to do with the fact that it's a port city. And some of it really, I think, just has to do with the way that it has been dealt with or not dealt with by local authorities. Um, and then I wanted to bring in as many dimensions of Oakland society as I could and sort of demonstrate the deeper complexities, interconnections between corrupt police, which Oakland has a deep history of, um, business, in particular, potentially Silicon Valley, um, always a culprit out here, and corrupt politicians. We just removed one here in Oakland. This is a thing, by the way, that is kind of an open secret in the city. Any of us who live here in Oakland, we can drive right to where it's happening. I mean, it's right there in the open. Young people, in some cases, young women, young men, underage who are walking the streets, that they are victims of trafficking. I also wanted to write a book that that made connections to the deeper histories of Oakland. So part of the heart of the mystery has to do with um, something that happened in Oakland in the 1920s. I'm now working on a second book called Sanctuary, which is finished. It'll come out next year. I'm just kind of going through some editing on it. And this one deals with another problem that we don't talk about in Oakland, and that's unhousing.
Mhm.
This one poses, I don't want to give too much away, but this one deals with a crime spree, a murder spree of unhoused persons. I learned in doing some of the research that when unhoused people die on the street, if there isn't anyone to claim them within 72 hours, their bodies are burned.
Oh, wow.
So then the evidence of why and how they may have perished is gone. So I imagined kind of a crime spree, but I wanted to really talk about what produces homelessness in the first place.
Mhm.
In a place such as where we live, where there are technically more vacant units than there are people on the street, why do we still have in Oakland 5,000 people on the street? What produces that? What's behind the thinking of those folks? And then also, again, to connect it to something historically in Oakland. Now, I may be right, I may be wrong about those things that I'm connecting them to, but I am speaking to a lot of political and historical forces that are real in the city.
Yeah, and what strikes me about what you're saying there, I was just working on the next issue of the Gaslight Gazette, and I was noting how basically the response to any problem, certainly in the last couple of decades in this country, has been to point to whoever the quote unquote other side is. That kind of system analysis, which we used to get from a lot of artists, by the way, like George Carlin or Richard Pryor. They used to, they didn't go for a political party or a politician. They talked about the system and put the system on trial. It seems like we've really lost that, and what you're doing in these books, I think, is just that, is trying to make a broader critique, right, of the system and the historical context. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the importance or why you think that's important?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up something really important. I'm forgetting the title of it, but there's a Richard Pryor film that is technically a noir. It was filmed during his height in the '70s, and it's about a group of I believe that they're auto workers, they're blue collar workers, union workers, etc., and they commit a burglary out of desperation, right? And then the rest of it is kind of how things play out after that. Um, Look, this is popular media. I'm banking on the fact that stories are as important as the kind of academic analysis that we do, and also that story and narrative is more accessible. Certainly, one of the things I love about writing a novel is it's cheaper than any of my academic books. So there are things that I can hint at a novel that maybe someone who would never read an academic book would ultimately read or think about, right?
And
Or
I
decide.
should just, sorry to interrupt you real quick, just to
Mhm.
explain to folks. So like academic presses tend to charge more. They'll say it's because they have to pay more reviewers and et cetera. Critics will say no, it's because you know that when a book's assigned has a guaranteed audience, you can jack up the price because students have to purchase it for a particular course. But traditionally, if you go to like non-academic publishers or book publishers, they tend to be a lot more affordable in
That's right.
terms of content, right? So sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
absolutely. And look, that means accessibility. For me. If you can, right now, for example, I'm working on an audio version of the first book, People's Detective, which I hope will come out towards the end of this calendar year. Okay. I'd like it to be there for Christmas. So I'm doing it, by the way. I'm reading it all myself.
Nice call. I really only like audiobooks when the author reads them. There's
Right,
something
that's
about
what people have told me, yeah. My wife is an avid consumer of audiobooks. She's, like, going through an audiobook, a full audiobook each week, and, that's what she says too, that she prefers that, with all of its flaws. I mean, initially, and I think the reason why it hasn't come out up to this point is that, initially I said, "Nobody wants to hear my voice," right? Which is the same problem that I had with podcasting. And then people will tell you afterwards, "Oh, yeah, I really love the sound of your voice." I'm like, "Okay, that's you."
You're
Right,
like, "Go ahead, finish your thought."
right. But there is a thing, I guess the way that we are constructed as human beings, the sound of our own voices is never pleasing to ourselves,
Yep.
right? And we don't quite hear it the way other people, hear it. So yeah, this is about accessibility, and I think what's been fascinating here is that I have this is a different audience than the audience that exists in academic conferences or in the university that are strictly speaking your students. So I'm talking to a lot of other writers when I go to festivals. I'm talking to genre. In my case, this is a mystery or detective fiction, genre fiction, noir fans. When I um, debuted the book at the recent Noir City Festival, um, there's just this group of people who are into noir film and they want to discuss this. What I find that's really interesting here is that I've decided to center all of these novels in Oakland, which is my adopted home. I'm born and raised in San Francisco, but my father had businesses in Oakland. He served black businesses here as a CPA. And so a lot of my best memories are about living here in Oakland. And my wife and I also experienced some discrimination in renting when we first got married in San Francisco, a place where I still own property. I experienced racial discrimination there, so we moved to Oakland. It's cheaper anyway, right? And I've fallen in love with this place. And I've got a whole audience of people that are just fascinated with Oakland and are buying into my idea of, hey, if Los Angeles, New York, or New Orleans, places like this can be prominent places for noir tales, what about Oakland? We're
Mhm.
perfect, right? I mean, the politics are messed up here, right? We have corrupt politicians all over the place. Um, we've got intrigue. Uh, yes, we have crime like every other city does. Not enough to send the National Guard. Okay.
Better make that
We
clear.
let me make it clear, we do not need you here. And by the way, if you come to Oakland, this could be the last place where the National Guard really want to be, all right? They don't wanna be doing any of this anyway, right? Uh,
No.
I really don't think you wanna be here in Oakland. We're pretty vocal. Um, so people are really enjoying that, whether they live here or they used to live here. I'm connecting with a lot of people around that who realize, yeah, right, why not Oakland? And it's also a radically diverse town that has an absolutely fascinating history that most people don't know about.
Mhm.
So most people are learning a little historical fact about Oakland when they read the novel. And then the other piece is that, Nolan, frankly, what I'm doing is this is just black folklore. I mean, this is also like me answering the call to something I grew up with, which were the tall tales that my dad, my grandfather, my grandmother used to tell me about all the people that they knew down south who migrated out west with them. And the stories were outrageous. And every Christmas or Thanksgiving or any holiday we got together, any dinner we had as a family, they would just get more outrageous. So, my grandfather would start out with a story he knew about a guy with 2 rows of teeth, and then it would be 3 rows the next time he talked about it, and he would have some crazy name, and, he would live past 100, and he would fight a pack of wild dogs, all this kinda stuff. And so, that was always really important to me as part of my identity structure were the stories, the narratives. I think there's something to be said right now for the place of the narrative as well and the stories that we can tell. And I think that this because the current administration regime um, is seeking to limit the stories we can tell. So, when you have the need to remove Frederick Douglass's material or Reverend Amos Brown in San Francisco's Bible, which was with him during the civil rights struggle as he marched with Dr. King. Someone is communicating to you that there are stories that cannot be told anymore in America, in the new order of America. And so I insist, I'm going to keep telling those stories.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that because before we got on the air, you mentioned about the historical importance of folks going outside of academia to create content on topics that are relevant to the larger community. And I think that's a really kind of critical point. And for folks who don't know why we're making this point, when you're in academia, there's this massive elitism that only the peer-reviewed journals and the most elite publishers, only the content in those matter, and things like podcasting and radio and television and popular articles, that's all trivial nonsense is the way a lot of academics see it. But you made a case to me before that that is not the case now, and it's never been the case. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that there's a enough historically of a history of individuals who were, and I'll just say specifically, anti-fascist, anti-racist, people who were pushing back against anti-Semitism, for example. Historically, whether we're talking about figures like Jean-Paul Sartre, or we're talking about some of the writers in the Negritude movement, um, or people like a Gloria Anzaldúa or a Bell Hooks who have mixed personal narrative along with rather pointed political commentary, who have been willing to be in the most public of spaces, whether those be television programs, podcasts, newspapers, journals, and to write and speak at every level to be able to communicate their ideas. Look, if our business is ideas, that's what we do. Our business is commentary, critique, ideas. If we're anything, what we are capable of doing is we're capable of looking at a particular moment and recognizing the significance of that moment and where it stands historically, and how things may play out in the future, what the scenarios are. This is how we're trained.
Mhm.
Why shouldn't we share that kind of ability, to the extent that we have it, with the rest of the world in as broad of a format as we can? Again, it's been done before. There's a reason why Franco's civil guard needed to kill the gay poet Garcia Lorca, or why punk rock musicians, Pussy Riot, for example, needed to be imprisoned by Putin, or why Donald Trump needs to remove Jimmy Kimmel, an allegedly, at least according to the Orange Man, inferior, talentless comedian. Talentless, but needed to be removed nonetheless, right?
Yeah,
And
you know
that's
what? Oh,
these things are challenging to power structures.
yeah, you know what? This is I don't want to get us too sidetracked on this, but what did you make of this? Because I thought there was something kind of strange in Trump's response to the Kimmel removal. He almost made he not almost he did. He made an argument for the fairness doctrine. He said that what Kimmel should what Kimmel is doing should be legal, which I disagree with that part. But he said the reason why he thought it should be legal is because 97% of the content and late night shows is against Trump. And he thinks it should be more balanced. I was like, well, that was the whole argument of the fairness doctrine, which
That's right.
mandated that channels evenly balanced, and something conservatives opposed and helped dismantle. I thought that was like a really interesting admission from Trump. What'd you make of that?
Well, Trump doesn't understand. He doesn't understand history. What he understands is he understands what he can get out of victimization, particularly the sense of white male victimhood. So he is still perpetuating a lie of white male victimhood, that conservative voices are outnumbered in media. That's simply not true. I mean, if we look at the amount of radio stations or podcasts that have a conservative bent, or the most popular ones, uh, I wouldn't necessarily, for example, call Joe Rogan left or right, but he's pushed the envelope on free speech in his ability to freely use, for example, the N word, something that I find offensive. But again, it's not against the law to engage in hate speech or to drop the N word, in describing things. He seems to take particular pleasure in that, or has taken pleasure in that. I don't like that. Um,
That is the
but
big. What you're saying there is the trade off, right? These folks
yeah,
wanted to be able to use the N word and the R word, but now that comes at the expense of being able to critique the president.
right. And so he doesn't. I think there's a part of him that really buys into this notion that the left wing media is, it victimizes perspectives like his, that there's too much of it. The point that he's really getting to is they want to eliminate it altogether. And I think now they're seeing possibly the reintroduction of something like the fairness doctrine as a way to eliminate anything, any speech that is opposed to them altogether. But that's not exactly what the fairness doctrine would give you if you reinstituted the fairness doctrine. It would also mean that I know people are insisting, because I heard this last night on CNN, Jimmy Kimmel needs to put conservative comedy writers on his program. Okay. I'm not sure what conservative comedy is, but that I've heard, like Dennis Miller, that isn't funny. Okay. You know, value judgment, but I don't find it funny. And I don't know who does, because Dennis Miller isn't doing it anymore. And if you notice, there aren't a lot of conservative comedians, maybe because it's not that funny, or it's not funny at all. But at the same time that you would do that, now we would need to have more, to be fair, more left-wing voices on Fox News. Are you prepared for that? Now, he hasn't thought through that. And he
Yeah,
doesn't understand the history of how important the removal of the fairness doctrine was to getting something like Fox News in the first damn place.
exactly. And and back to our conversation about, systems, it seems like the left and right comedian, whatever that means, I mean, that is the problem. The comedians that were just social critics, they weren't advocating for a party or an ideology, but just kind of lampooned our culture and structure to make us confront absurdities that we defend, right? That's this To me, that's always a beautiful part of stand-up comedy is I involuntarily laugh. I involuntarily admit something that I may not want to admit publicly or even to myself, but the comedian makes me do it. And I
Yes.
think that can be really, really powerful. But when it's used to just, I don't know, you pick on trans people or haha, the president's orange, like it doesn't have that same effect to me. But I don't know. What do
Yeah.
you think?
Yes, so the we invented stand-up comedy in this country. I used to teach a class on this, by the way, called ethnic humor. And the way that I would teach this is I had students understand that, first of all, we created this form. This is an American art form. And the core of this American art form, put together by people like Lenny Bruce and Dick Gregory and other real path breakers in this field, involved the thing that you just referred to. It's called the comedy of abjection. It's where I tell a joke that is so utterly inappropriate, yet true. Okay, on some level, it's very true, right? Um, that you laugh. Your initial laugh is really based on how shocking it is. The things that you said, how shocking they are. And then there's a follow-up laugh. So this is always a bigger laugh than just an ordinary joke. The secondary laugh, it comes from me laughing at myself for admitting that I found that funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get this double laughter, and some really good examples of this are, for example, Dick Gregory told a lot of jokes about being in segregated spaces. Now, they're not funny on one level, and yet they're absolutely hilarious. What's funny is that you laughed at the thing in the first place, right?
Mhm.
And you made light of segregation. So he tells a joke about being in a segregated restaurant, and white waiter comes up to him and says, "Boy, if you whatever you do to that chicken, boy, because there's a plate of chicken in front of him. Whatever you do to that chicken, boy, I'm gonna do to you, right?" So what Dick Gregory does is he grabs the chicken off his plate and he kisses it. Now, if you think about the setting in which that's happening, a setting that people were beaten for being in those spaces. And that's the context in which the joke is being told, right? You've seen the beatings, you've seen the fire hoses, you've seen the dogs, and he's telling you that joke in that moment. So there's some awkwardness about laughing about that. And then the fact that you found that funny. The other classic one, which is kind of more psychosexual, is Lenny Bruce used to come out and start his gigs. Lenny Bruce, by the way, whose free speech was denied by the Catholic
Mhm.
Church because he kept criticizing the Catholic Church, and ultimately their affiliation with organized crime that owned a lot of the venues that he would perform in
And weren't
wound up getting him denied his cabaret card, the ability to perform. And ultimately, you could say that's what drove him to a drug death, a drug overdose.
weren't the feds were following him around too, right?
Absolutely, yeah. The same way that, by the way, they went after Billie Holiday. They killed both of them on drug use. And again, the power of a song and the power of a joke, right? This is the power of a narrative. It's enough to get you killed. This is a country that we live in that banned the ghost dance, in which you have to think, did white people really believe that if folks did the ghost dance, that white people would disappear and the buffalo would go back? No, of course couldn't have feared that. But what they did fear was the power of people, indigenous people in that case, believing in this enough to stand up to the guns and the soldiers, which is what they did. So you have to commit a massacre to wipe that out. Lenny's big joke was he would walk out on stage and he would, introduce himself. And he would say, "Hey, hi, good evening. Hey, I'm going to piss on you." And people would laugh at that on a variety of levels. One was just, this is the 1950s, right? We're not talking about water sports, on the stage in the 1950s, but this guy is. And I know what he's talking about. And I've thought about what he's talking about, and maybe, it interests me what he's talking about, right? Or I've done that, right? And now I'm laughing at myself for frankly having admitted, that I even know that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and to your point also about the real motive is suppressing stories. Like in the case of like Holiday, Harry Anslinger, who was behind prosecuting her, he did it under the auspices of battling drugs, but of course
Yeah.
his child was a horrible drug addict who he covered up for, and so there was something else about Holiday, a black woman speaking that powerfully and drawing audiences like that
Well,
seemed to
she
be more the
wouldn't stop
motivation.
singing the song.
Say it again.
She wouldn't stop singing the song.
Oh, well, that was Loverboy, right?
No, it's Strange Fruit, the song
Strange
about
Fruit. That's
lynching,
right. Yeah.
and that was written. I've forgotten the name of the couple that wrote that song, but these were people who wrote it were, affiliated with the American Socialist Party and had been involved with these kind of left of center clubs. And so, I mean, the song itself has a very deep and interethnic tradition. The people who wrote that song were not black, but they had read about a lynching, and so wrote a song about that. And it's very graphic. Its description of the South is quite graphic. It tells a story that we have been running away from since the end of the Reconstruction, at least, maybe since the end of the Civil War, but definitely from the end of the Reconstruction, where we got into that sort of new Southern narrative, right? What do they call it? The lost cause.
It's called, yeah.
Yeah. So that song undermines the entire lost cause thing. It's not just as often uh, the Confederate flag waving people say it's our culture. No, we know that that's a hate symbol. It's about lynching. It was attendant at violent criminal acts.
And also treason, which I that one
Yeah,
always gets swept
treason.
under the rug, for the Constitution lovers out there,
Yeah.
but I'm glad you're continuing, this tradition. I know you do a podcast, as well as you're doing the writing, so you tell folks where they can find your work, follow, and support it?
So the best way to connect with all of it is at nicholasbaham.com, where all of the news about the podcast, the entire first season, all the clips are up. We have recorded a second season. It will debut with the second book in 2026. But that's where the website is where all of the information is. Also, where you can the links for where you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and where you can catch my Substack. I publish a Substack, or I endeavor to publish a Substack every 2 weeks. I'm not quite as good as you, um, but listen, what you do with this podcast and with your Substack are really important. They are it's what I'm talking about here in terms of how we get outside of the academy to the rest of the world, to regular folk who can access our ideas and who maybe have the time to listen to a podcast as they're, on an hour-long commute.
Oh, yeah, which
You know,
we know
we're
about here in
trying
the
to
Bay
get the
Area.
people where they are, right, Nolan?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it. All right. Thank you so much for coming on the Disinfo Detox, Nick. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you, Detoxers. We'll see you next time.